So, I want to talk about the power of this song as far as I'm concerned. Those of us who speak on these various Sundays, we pick our own titles, we write our own titles, and the title I wrote was one that I was a little bit uncomfortable with. The title of today is Looking for Love. And the reason I was uncomfortable with it is because it doesn't sound very metaphysical. And metaphysical would be, say, finding love, being love, seeing love. That would be very metaphysical, right? In the affirmative. But I settled on this partially because this song, which is one of my favorite songs, I think we all walk around with our top 10 in our head, and this is one of them for me, my top 10, is that I love the perspective he's sharing. Imagine that. Imagine we get up in the morning and we look out the window, or we head out into that wet garden he talks about, and we tune our sight into seeing that. I love how he uses the word recreation in there, of the new day. The first blackbird, the first sun, the first everything. To see this incredible beauty for the first time. And the reason this is important to me, because I feel like this song is a love song. And Cat Stevens, like all musicians, have written and sung straight up love songs, loving women, loving life, loving whatever, loving women sing about loving guys and all that stuff. And this is not overtly that way, but this to me is a love song. You know that this guy is walking out the backyard into his garden, and he senses love. Because the first of anything feels like a gift to him. He is being loved. He is being nurtured. The blackbird's first song. The first rain. The first vision. Imagine if he had a night before which wasn't so good. Maybe he got into an argument with someone, or maybe he lost something, or lost somebody, or he got a bad diagnosis yesterday, right? And then he walks out the next morning, and this is what he experiences. The love of the universe. Now, the reason this is important to me is because when I first got involved in metaphysics, a little over 30 years ago, I loved the philosophies, I loved the teachings, but I got hung up in something. And it was hard for me to transcend what I was hung up in. And I want to talk about that. I was raised in straightforward kinds of Christianity, biblical, Judeo-Christian, all that stuff. And in the Judeo-Christian and biblical, if I'm having a bad day, if my life is not going the way I want it to, and maybe I'm feeling lonely, or I'm feeling like I'm outside the movements of others, I'm an outsider, so to speak, then what that tradition tells me is that you are loved by God. And in the case of that tradition, it was a male God, God the Father. And so I remember visions of, imagine God the Father holding you. Imagine sitting on his lap. The good Father, the loving Father. And we would carry around this image within ourselves. That's what we were taught. Now, I moved to metaphysics because I had a lot of problems with that I'm not going to go into today. But I moved into metaphysics, and I was under some really great teachers. The people who were, a couple generations ahead of me, other ministers. And so I asked, and one of the ministers I asked about this was the founder of this center right here, Reverend Dr. Carolyn McEwen, who I took my practitioner training with. And so I talked to her one time, and I said, I'm really kind of hung up on this love thing, man. I mean, because we talk about God being a creative energy. We talk about God being the essence of the universe. We talk about, living within God, God living within us. It's not personified. It's an energy. It's what runs behind the universe. But we say God is love. And so I talked to her about that. I said, God, love is such a personified kind of thing. At least that was my idea. A human thing. I don't get it. I don't get how an energy or a power can show me love. And so what she told me was, she said, Andy, God is expressing love all the time. You have to look for it. You have to train your eyes to begin to see the loving nature within life around us. When we think about environmentalism, one of the cornerstones of the environmentalist movement is something called ecosystems. And the term ecosystems was brought forward by a gentleman by the name of Arthur Transley in 1935. He was a British scientist. And basically what he said was that an ecosystem is a geographic area where plants, animals, and other organisms, as well as weather and landscape, work together to form a bubble of life. Studying the interactions between organisms, other organisms, and with their environment as integrated systems. So all these little organisms that work together in order to create a place to live in harmony with each other. I love what he says there, a bubble of life. So if I'm a little organism and I'm born into an ecosystem, and I'm surrounded by the plants and the weather and the climate and everything else that shows up for me to live, it's like it's all there. Now, I think, when I put this into the context of love, I think for those of us who are parents, well, we've all been children, but some of us are parents and some of us aren't. Isn't the greatest, the very greatest gift we can give children or receive as children are the resources we need to thrive? Not just survive, but to thrive. And I say thrive because over millions of years within those ecosystems, evolution was taking place. And for evolution to take place, that meant there was thriving. That's amazing. And so I was thinking about, I just was down in Monterey this last week for about 5 days. There's a gentleman down there by the name of, that we associate with Monterey named Ed Ricketts, who's part of the Steinbeck collection of characters. And he was a biologist. And he ran a lab down there for years when John Steinbeck knew him, where he was harvesting species out of these tide pools, the Pacific tide pools up and down the coast. And he would offer them up to universities and colleges, and he studied them and wrote about them. And he wrote a book that last time I looked, it was actually still being used, called Between Pacific Tides, which is a seminal book that he was writing back in the 30s and 40s. Ed Ricketts was among the first people who discovered the secrets of the universe, the inner workings of the universe, by going out to the tide pools and gazing down inside there and just watching all the interaction of life, how life was showing up for life in different forms. Understanding that to the creatures who lived there, this was their home, this was their environment. And that this great power, we are a teaching in metaphysics where we listen to science, we believe in science, but we also believe in a power behind science. Like I was told one time, biology can tell us how a rose blooms, but it can't tell us why. And so this idea of coming together in this way, this idea of seeing these expressions of love for each other. And I think that this is incredibly important now, because as we look around the world, and as I say this, I'm sure that a lot of things will come up in your thinking. There are different aspects of our world right now where, how are we doing on showing up on the God love front? You know what I'm saying? Because this is the deal. In metaphysics, we also believe in freedom. The prayer that I shared with you this morning, for those of you who are new to us, and for those of you who have been with us for a while, I hope that I did a good job with it, is this idea that we have the freedom to move through any challenge. In terms of, and that's why I asked you, what are the words that you want to bring forward? And basically what metaphysics says is that this power that we call God, Spirit, provides the resources. The tide pools that the scientists were gazing into back in the early part of the 20th century, watching all that life. Who brought forward the resources? Who pushed the resources together? Who supplied what was needed in that tide pool for life to thrive, for life to flourish, for understandings to come within those beings? You know, what's really interesting is that in the 20th century, one of the big breakthroughs when you read about, you know, the natural, we call it let's say the world of other beings, four-legged, eight-legged, feathered, finned, furred, was this idea in the 20th century, like all of a sudden we started to say, well, you know, primates like gorillas and chimpanzees can use tools. And later on we found out, well, you know, birds like a raven can use tools. The tool thing was a big deal. Oh my God, there's a few of these species who use tools. But as our technology has changed, our abilities to photograph, our abilities to watch life up close, guess what? Everything's using tools. I read this week how octopus pie, whatever you call them, they use tools. Do you know that ants use tools? All kinds of insects use tools. And now this is starting to be known. It's like, yeah, you know, all these beings that we share the planet with are tool users, which tells us that there's an intelligence. In fact, what we know around the plant world, and this has been known by Native American shamans for a long time, but now it's starting to be understood by science, that plants, given a natural landscape, who tend to show up next to each other over and over again, there's a reason. Because they have some sort of a relationship. They protect each other. They help each other thrive. So now the big deal, I've been reading a book by a writer by the name of Simon Barnes that goes deep into what we call the animal world. I would like to say that the world of other beings, and is that now science is starting to recognize humor, morality, choice, understanding. And even superstition. One of the pieces he writes is he talks about a certain kind of bird who, like, say, I think it was in the family of the pigeons, and pigeons can kind of live on anything, right? That's why they've done so well around human beings. And scientists have been watching them closely. And they notice that among pigeons, sometimes if they have come somewhere to feed and the food is gone and they're looking for it, they will do something odd to try, it's almost like to try and spark up some more food. And they talk about one pigeon, the food would be gone, he's looking around, he would turn around 3 times and look and find food. And they equating this to superstition. There are things among, especially gorillas and chimpanzees, that are showing morals, ethics, and even, to some extent, they believe spirituality. Spirituality has been looked at among elephants because they say that elephants who migrate hundreds of miles in Africa in order to survive the seasons and to thrive, and they say, you know, the African savanna is literally covered with bones because of all the animals that have perished out there. But the elephants only stop at bones that are elephant. They know they're elephant. And they will stop sometimes and spend time with trunks, and they will feel those bones. And they will bring the young forward to the bones, which is, we are starting to translate as a form of spirituality. Hey kid, here's the ancestor. It's Earl. I knew him. He was a good elephant. The expressions that we see around us, and this is what Dr. Carolyn was trying to share with me, is, Andy, look at the nature of life from the standpoint of love. Speaking of Simon Barnes, he tells a story that there was a yacht race or a boat race of some kind in the Caribbean, and one of the sailors was washed overboard. And the crew, he lost sight of him right away. The vessel was moving so fast, they went by him and they didn't know where he was, and the seas were a little bit heavy. So they let everybody in the race know what was going on. They stopped the race, and all the boats started looking for this guy. Couldn't find him, looked all over the place. But he was found by the sailor was found by a pod of dolphins. And so the dolphins began to circle the sailor. And then they began to, in other words, they were spending time with him. But yet they gave him enough distance because, he might be afraid of them, I guess. I don't know. Then after a while, it was a large pod of dolphins. They began to swim from the sailor out for a long distance, then come back to the sailor and out for a long distance, and come back to the sailor and out for a long distance. Now, as we know, when dolphins swim, they get our attention because they jump out of the water as they swim. Well, there was a skipper on one of the boats who was looking that started watching these dolphins. And so I wonder, are they trying to tell us something? So he took his boat and he said, let's sail towards where they're coming from. And they found the sailor. Mr. Barnes goes on to say, among many experts, when dolphins and whales go out of their way to help other creatures with their needs, what does that mean? Caring? Morality? Or perhaps love? Is love something that is dialed in to nature, to the nature of being? I'm aware of the question that's hanging in the room right now. Why do you suppose that a dolphin can express love? An ant can express love because an ant will help an inferior ant work. An elephant can express love by honoring an ancestor. Why do we struggle with it? Why do we find ourselves in the place that we do in this world, among our families sometimes, among our politics, among our nations, why? Because it is our belief system in metaphysics, and we may find out we're wrong with this, but there is an element of freedom that we as human beings practice. I think when an elephant gets up every morning, it knows it's an elephant. I think dolphins know they're dolphins. I think ants know they're ants. But I'm not sure sometimes we know who we are. There's this great Eastern reading that I use where I work sometimes. And I'm going to paraphrase the story, and that is that there is the beginnings of a lotus flower that lays on the bottom of a polluted, toxic pond where there can be no light seen, and sometimes within the water nothing else can grow. And the lotus blossom will come forth, or the lotus plant will come forth, begin to make its way up, all the way up to the surface to find the sun, where one of the most beautiful flowers on earth comes to fruition. So at the end of this story is this, okay, let's dissect the meaning of this. How does the lotus blossom even know that there's a surface to go to? There's a sun waiting for it in all that toxicity. And the answer in the Eastern tradition is the lotus blossom knows what it is. We are beings of love. Ernest Holmes, our teacher, talked about the fact that the great power of the universe is ultimately grounded in love. And he said, when we run contrary to that, our manifestations become our challenges. He said, the power that makes us sick can also heal us. It's the same power that we use in terms of, I believe, love. Now, for those of you who are new to our philosophy, because God has been portrayed with a white hat and the devil with the black hat and things like that, all this duality, Holmes is basically saying, Spirit, God is a power, a force for good, for love, for creation, but it's up to us to use it the way we see fit to use it. Charles Fillmore of Unity says, love is the pure essence of spirit that binds together the whole of life in all its expressions. The most beautiful of all the God attributes, love is the binding principles contained in harmony. That was one of the words I think one of you used. Harmony, right? Somebody did. Alignment? No, maybe it was alignment. Harmony, alignment. So I want to end, and I've talked kind of on the macro level. I want to end on the micro level with a little story that's a little bit mystical. And my father lived in Arizona, lived a very long life. And the last 10, 15 years, he had gone into a form of dementia. And eventually, he went through the whole thing of, forgetting things and forgetting names and all that. And then eventually, with that form of dementia, his body would begin to forget how to function. And so that's how he made his transition. So my sister, I made a deal with my sister that I would go down at this one point in his life, and then she would go down, when we got a call that, he's coming to a place. So she went down there. She and her husband went down there. And my dad's wife had put him into a special house. I don't want to call it a facility. It was it was a home, and the woman who ran it specialized in dementia. She was really gifted. She was wonderful. She knew how to deal. My dad was incredibly happy there in his own way until the physical things began to really happen. So anyway, so they got a call. My sister went down to Phoenix, and she was there for a week, and she got a call early one morning. Said, you may want to come over. She'd spent time with him and stuff. So she went over with her husband, my brother-in-law. Excuse me. My sister and her husband were very strong, fundamentalist, born-again Christians. And I'm just saying that, and I want to say this really quickly, that they do not believe that there is any kind of wisdom that comes from anywhere except Jesus, period. None. No other source. Okay, I just need to say that, because this is important. So I go in, and my dad didn't know my sister, didn't know anybody, but they're present for him. And she, I'm here for you, Dad, and his name was Floyd and stuff. And he said, I can hear angels. And my brother-in-law, and this is what, he said, Floyd, tell me what they sound like. My sister's like, because she was still in her religion, and my brother-in-law just like, tell me what they sound like. And he described that. That's just love. We are loved. We need to look for it, though. Because right now we got CNN, what I'm saying? And it's hard to look past CNN and see some love, but we need to look for love. It's there for us. real quickly, I think God is calling right now. But anyway, just really quickly while we're waiting for we're waiting to see what that conversation's like. What does God sound like? Anyway, my father-in-law, my wife Judy, her dad was he was going through a challenge at the end of his life, and he was at one of the in-low care facilities here in Chico. I think it was physical therapy. And so Judy gets a call one morning and says, "Hey, we got your dad. He was heading out one of the hallways last night, And so Judy went in and said, "Dad, what's going on?" He said, now Judy's mom had made her transition years before this. And for this story, I got to tell you, this one priest made his transition a while before. So anyway, he looks at Judy and he said, "Your mom and father so-and-so, they were in a cab waiting for me down there, and I'm supposed to go." And Judy, Judy's sister's like, "Oh, Dad, oh my God, yeah." Judy's like, "Oh, okay." Because Judy, in a few weeks, it wasn't long before he made his transition. I love that. Maybe he's afraid of death. But you know what? I will send you a cab with a priest and your wife. And it's all good, right? I love that. And I believe on a mystical level, I believe in that, I believe that. That's love. Man, I am so far over time. I'm really sorry. All right. So, namaste. Thank you for being